Hi there, everyone. Coming up on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, we'll get you all of your latest news and information from the state capitol in CDE. Plus, we're talking about staff shortages and COVID-19 vaccine mandates.
The ACSA Legislative Lunch Break starts now.
And it is 1 o'clock. We welcome you on a Wednesday to the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, along with Edgar Zazwata, ACSA Senior Director of Policy and Governmental Relations. I'm Naj Alikhan, ACSA Senior Director of Marketing and Communications. Welcome. So happy to have you with us here on a Wednesday. Go ahead and jump onto our chat and say hello. Let us know where you're watching from today and what's happening in your school district and your region. Edgar, how are you today?
I'm doing good. I'm still I'm admiring Michael Kelly's work there. You know, that intro, that was next level. I don't know if we could live up to that hype, but yeah, I'm kind of intimidated by it now.
I would say our executive producer Michael Kelly put that together, and Edgar and I have been sitting here for the last hour going, oh my goodness, I don't know if we're going to be able to live up with that. And he just gave you part of that conversation. Edgar, I would say this, it certainly makes us seem bigger than we really are.
Well, yeah, well, we'll see. As you put it earlier, it's just, I forget your exact wording, but you know, it may show that we're just too, I don't remember the verb you used there or the adjective, but we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, you know what? I'm sure our great educators can probably figure out a good adjective to dump into that. Angela Shull, Gary Reller, our first couple here on the chat today. Deanna, good to see you, and Sheldon Smith. Again, go ahead and jump onto our chat today. Say hello and let us know what's happening in your region. We got a lot of news to cover for you today. Also, we are going to talk about staff shortages, COVID-19 vaccine mandates, and testing happening in California school districts. That's coming on a little bit later on in the show. Edgar, of course, some of the big news that's coming out today, the FDA panel recommending COVID-19 shots for children 5 through 11 years old. It looks like that means we are now moving towards that COVID-19 vaccine mandate for students and for educators coming around. I do want to highlight this, Edgar, and I'll get your feedback on it. Governor Newsom just wrapping up a news conference earlier this morning. A couple of things from it. Gave a sober reminder of case positivity rates at this point last year and how the cases spiked around the holidays. And of course, the ticket out of the pandemic is vaccinations, and we need to keep pressure on for those who are unvaccinated and promote boosters for those who are eligible. A question was asked, an update on student vaccine mandate date. Does it move up to January as a result of what the FDA has approved at this point? The notes we get from the news conference, it's status quo as of now. We're leading the nation. We're working with districts to prepare and work through the protocols and scale. There are existing requirements. Full authorization hasn't happened yet, so they're still on the same timeline. Edgar, you and I have talked about this on the show with our members, of course. We have that July 2022 deadline that exists for the student vaccines. If it's fully approved by the FDA, we have this now, a recommendation from the FDA. Just give me your feedback on what you read and then what you heard from the governor today.
Yeah, I'm glad you're asking this question because it gives us an opportunity to just clarify again. I know it gets so confusing, especially these days with so much information about boosters, about emergency authorization for 5 to 11, about when, FDA may give full approval to folks that are older, right? So like there's a lot of moving pieces here as it relates to some of these timelines with the vaccination requirements. But just to clarify, what we're hearing today, it refers to, yes, that the vaccine will be available to more of the kids, but it doesn't change the timeline in terms of any of these requirements. We're still anticipating that none of this goes into effect. And again, that would be for grades 7 to 12 in July of 2022. So the governor got asked that question. He trying to underscore that in terms of what this means. What does it not mean? We know our folks already dealing with so much out on the field. So as of now, nothing has changed in terms of timelines or requirements.
I want to make note of this, Edgar, as we get ready to move on to another topic. Mark Galley today says, on the heels of anticipating 1.2 million doses that will be available to California that will probably roll out later next week. They're setting up clinics at schools and across the state. But of course, it's not just for kids, also for adults and caregivers who might be interested in getting the vaccine. Of course, I don't want to say that we've been pushing for vaccinations, but again, there's a lot of science out there and a lot of advocacy for the vaccination. So new information on that, new comments from the governor. I want to bring this up, Edgar, because last week we talked about the deadline for the educator vaccine mandate. And what it's looking like as far as schools are concerned, school districts. And I do have some statistical information that some of my communications colleagues have presented to me this week about vaccination rates and, of course, how districts are handling some of the staffing shortages. So let me start with Cupertino Union School District, 96.5% vaccination rate for employees. It's fantastic. They are testing throughout the district, and they're asking those who decline to stay to also test twice weekly. Employees receive a form every Monday to fill out with their testing dates, and HR handles all of the follow-ups. Our good friend Scott Smith, a viewer of this show, the comms leader over at ABC Unified, he notes no positive tests in his district since testing began. That's great news. They have allowed those who want to test to get a test in addition to those who haven't been vaccinated or haven't chosen to provide verification. He notes for staffing, administrators and teachers on special assignment, many of them are in the classrooms, and credentialed district staff also stepping in. It's all hands on deck. It's something we're hearing fairly consistently, and we'll talk with our guests about that as well. Two more for you. Carmel Unified, 91.24% vaccination rate. That's great. Testing being provided on school sites. And if testing is not completed by Wednesday, then it's site or district administrators that do the follow-up initial. But again, if it's not completed by Thursday, then HR gets in touch with everyone. As far as their staffing shortages, they hired permanent subs at a higher daily rate and work every day. They may be assigned to cover a vacancy, serve as a roving sub, or provide enrichment services as needed. And then we have this one in from Clovis Unified, and then we'll move along in Edgar and get your comments. 66% district-wide vaccination percentage, 72% certificated employees. The employees have the ability to test during their workday, and electronic reminders. That's what Clovis Unified is using, electronic reminders to make sure that their staff gets tested. They have increased daily and long-term sub rates, expedited hiring and orientations for subs, used admins to cover along with our teachers on special assignment from our curriculum and professional development area, pulled in retirees, those on provisional sub permits. They're now looking into hiring full-time temp positions as teacher on special assignment and would be assigned several schools to cover. Okay. Lots of data for you, and I want to just get your impression of that data, because we have talked about, depending on where you're at in the state, depending on what's happening over there, things are different with vaccination rates and even with staff shortage.
I think you hit it on the head there. I think it's a cross section, right? Small sample, but I think it gives you an idea of just generally what we've been hearing, consistent with talking to folks every day around the state. Depends on the community. Depends on the dynamics. It could vary from almost 100% vaccination to other communities. The numbers are ticking up, but there is some challenges. And I know there is a lot of questions right now in terms of, okay, with some of these requirements, but California, a lot of headlines about California leading the nation in terms of case rates. And actually one of the reporters, I saw some comments in the chat about why now, why are these requirements coming into place if we're doing well on the COVID front? And this is not my perspective. This is I will echo what I've been hearing from the administration. I've heard this a number of times over the last couple of days. They're obviously trying to send a very cautious message. They're asking us to remind ourselves of where we were at a year ago today. Right before Halloween, we had that short respite where, again, we had very low case rates. and then we went into this winter surge. And so they keep reminding the California residents that we're not out of this yet, that in fact, our case numbers and many of the metrics were worse this summer than they even were last year before vaccination. So obviously, I think this is why the governor's office is pushing a lot of this information. This is why we're going to hear a lot in terms of the push to get even younger folks vaccinated. With that said, we get this, and I echo this every week. We get that this conversation is difficult in many parts of our state, and this is going to look very different in every community. And I think hence the conversation today about staffing shortages and some of the talks we'll have in coming weeks is, what can we do about this? What is it from a policy level? What is it as an association that we can do to help mitigate some of the challenges that our folks are going to undoubtedly continue to face?
Yeah. And folks, and I'll refer over to what Gary Reller has to say, but go ahead and jump in with any information on what your district is doing. Obviously, the more information that we have, best practices, the better all of us are. Gary Reller, who's the principal over at Matthew Gage Middle School in Riverside Unified, he says Riverside Unified has increased subrate of pay, increased the period subrate for teachers, and the Riverside County Office of Education has been providing subs as well. It is getting better, so that's some positive news coming out of one area. But of course, we're going to hear about some of the staffing shortages that are statewide. So go ahead and jump in, folks, and let us know what's happening in your part of the state. You know what, Edgar? Let's go ahead and transition. Let's talk about COVID-19 vaccination mandates, and let's talk about staffing shortages. We have two guests for you today. Nicole Glenter is the Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources at Ukiah Unified School District, also the 2021 ACSA Ray Curry Award winner. And then Buck Rogerman is the principal at Forest Green Elementary in the Pacific Grove Unified School District. Nicole and Buck, it is an honor to have you guys both on the show today. Thank you so much for being with us. I read off some statistics, a lot of statistics right here at the top of the show from districts about vaccination rates for their district employees and staff shortages. We've heard so much about the challenges that schools are facing here in this third year of this pandemic. So why don't we start by having you guys paint a picture of what's happening in your district and then what's happening at some of your school sites. So Nicole, let me have you start.
Sure. In our district, we have about 80% of our staff that are vaccinated, and the rest are testing weekly. The staffing shortage is felt acutely in my district, in my entire region, in all positions. The positions where the shortage seem to hit the hardest and have the greatest impact are bus drivers, of course, classroom teachers and paraprofessionals. So we've had administrators covering as many positions as they can, and they're definitely feeling the effects of that. I'm covering. We have district level administrators covering each week. There's some job that they cover, from crossing guard to paraprofessional to teacher. So it is all hands on deck, and it's one thing about schools is schools are filled with employees that get the job done because they know how important it is to serve the kids that come to school every day. And so we always make it happen. Schools open every day, regardless of the staff that's available. So we've been struggling for sure. But as we always do, we're making it happen.
Buck, let me ask you about your school community and what you're hearing in the field from your colleagues about what the situation looks like in your area.
Sure. At PGUSD, we have a vaccination rate of over 95% in our district, and we're really fortunate that the adults that are working in the K-12 setting that are working with students, we have a 100% vaccination rate. We've been fortunate that the folks in PG really understand the importance of keeping each other safe, and so we've had some great buy-in from not only our staff, but also from our families as well. And even the people that might not necessarily agree with everything that we're doing, they and their children are still following the policies and procedures that we have in place. I think that as far as staffing goes, the greatest challenge that we're facing right now is trying to staff the programs that we're trying to expand with some of the grant funding that we're getting. we're looking at trying to expand some intervention programs and offerings to address, the learning needs that have surfaced over the last year and a half. And it's been really hard for us to build a pool of, instructional assistants to help at the K through 5 level. And then also to find those teachers on special assignment that can kind of help lead that process, break that data down for our teachers, and really give them some great advice on the best way to make those tier 1 adjustments within the classroom. I think at the secondary level, what we're finding is that when a teacher steps away from their assignment, it is almost impossible to backfill that teacher. A couple things that we've done in terms of substitutes is that we have raised the rate of pay, and that's helped us out a little bit, but I don't think that there's an site admin on this broadcast right now that hasn't stepped in to teach PE, second grade, kindergarten. I use the kindergarten term loosely because I'm not really sure how much teaching I did in there. But yes, we have those other duties as assigned. I'm helping wheel, the tables outside for lunchtime so that we can do an outdoor lunch and keep our kids as safe as possible, because we just don't have the staff to do all of the extra jobs that go along with the extra safety measures that we have to take. So, we have spirited people that jump in and pitch in, and we're making it work.
Hey, Naj, one of my favorite parts that's become about this show is that aside from listening to us or our guests are always great, right? But you and I, we pretend we know about some stuff. But
right.
My favorite part has become when the members are actually sharing resources with each other. And I see a little bit of that in the chat about having a place where folks are coming together and just giving some perspective of what folks are dealing with. So I would encourage very much that as we talk about the staffing shortages and how folks are addressing it, some of the strategies that they're looking at, the chat's a great place for that. Buck, let me start with you just to dig in on this. I mean, I always say our ACSA members, sometimes we can be our worst enemy in terms of when we're looking for changes, because you guys always just make it work, right? You said that, and I think both of you just said this, no matter how many people are showing up, no matter how many staff you have, somehow kids are still being served, right? But with that said, this has to have an impact on not only our students, and also on your teams, on your employees. So give us a little more insight. Like, how is the fact that we're hurting on the staff shortage, how is it affecting day-to-day instruction? What is it doing to those folks that are coming to work every day? We'll start with Bud.
I think that one of the most important things to know is that it's taking its toll, right? And that's one of the things I think that all of us have experienced, that there's times when you wake up on Tuesday morning feeling like it probably should be Friday morning because you put in such a long Monday. And not only from an admin standpoint, but, like I know our teachers and our classified staff too, they're working their hearts out to make this work as well as it possibly can for the kids and to keep things as normal as possible. I saw one of the comments that went through, our screen asking, if our case rates are low in our state, then why would we look at, a mandate for people that are ages 5 through 12? And I think that if the vaccine can help us get back closer to a normal operating procedure on our sites, then it's going to be worthwhile to have that vaccine mandate. There are so many programs that are limited or that we're just not able to offer still because of the safety restrictions that we have to keep in place for what are now the most vulnerable student population, and those are the students that are ages 12 and under. So with the FDA making their approval and the recommendation that children get vaccinated, I'm really hopeful that can kind of push us into the next phase where we can start to reintroduce a lot of the programs that we've had to modify or just flat out cancel.
Nicole, from your perspective, I mean, what are you seeing in terms of just the impact on instruction and impact on employees?
There is definitely a cumulative effect of this sort of schedule where we have people, no matter what your job is in a school district, you're doing something a little different and you're doing more of it, and it builds up. And we're seeing that people some are just getting tired. And so, and when you get tired, you get ill. And so we're seeing some people that they're taking longer to recover from illnesses that they normally would have bounced back. And I'm not talking COVID, I'm just talking just being ill. And so we're seeing some that are not wanting to go out on leave because they know that they leave a void and that there's not likely to be a sub. And we're having to really push and say, you need to go home and get better because the long-term impact is on it's going to affect your students, because we need you at 100% just as soon as you can get there. So we're seeing this accumulative effect of the additional work. And one of the things that we're doing in our district, and I know that other districts are looking at this as well, is identifying things that we're going to select to abandon, activities that we're going to say we're not going to do that this year, so that we can really focus our energy on what will get the biggest bang for our buck for our students. And there's a lot that we, there's not a lot. There are some things that we do that if we could put a pause on and do later, we want to do that so that we can focus our limited human resources on the work that absolutely has to get done every day.
Just want to remind you guys, if you have questions or comments for our guests today, go ahead and jump into the chat and drop those in there. Nicole, I'm going to have you start on this, because both of you have been in education for a long time, probably have a unique perspective on why is it that we are having these staffing shortages? Why is it severe, so severe really, in public education? Nicole, I'll have you start.
Well, that's a really big question. It's this staffing shortage is not new. It's definitely exacerbated due to our current circumstances. I think that currently we're in a situation where we already had a bit of a staffing shortage, and then you bring COVID, and then there are these new programs to mitigate the impact of COVID, and for those programs, we're required to hire additional staff. And there's no one to hire, or very few people to hire. So with COVID, there's obvious absences due to having to quarantine, or recovery from a vaccination shot if somebody gets ill for a few days. There's all those things that are due to COVID that are exacerbating it. But in our area, especially, we're in Northern California, it's a little bit more remote. There's not a university right here in town. So it can be difficult to recruit teachers and other positions. And fewer people are going into teaching because it's a really hard job. And it seems to be getting more challenging. And that's one of the things that we're also doing in our district, is trying to see what can we do to help teachers really focus on what drew them to education, and that's working with students. And that's an uphill battle. It has been for a while. There's always these things that come up. There's paperwork that has to be done. Those things are not fun. But during COVID, it seems like all of those things that we've always struggled with are magnified.
Hey, Buck, before you answer this question, I want to bring this comment in here from Morgan Nugent. Morgan says, being open the most part for in-person learning for 2 years, our staff is working hard, but we're afraid that we will be losing some of our new young teachers who are feeling like this is normal. Questions on, can I do this for 30 years is already being asked. Buck, it's a great setup really to the question that I asked Nicole, and I'll have you address this as well. Why are staffing shortages so severe in public education? What are you experiencing?
Well, I think that Nicole touched on it too. It's because the job is harder than it has ever been, and I think that when people who might be thinking about going into education watch the stories that get carried on the news, I think that what they see are a lot of challenges that public ed is facing, whether it has to do with the back and forth at school board meetings, or all of the controversy around the vaccinations, and hearing school officials talking and trying to address those kinds of things. I think that that there's going to be people that might be thinking, well, do I really want to make that kind of a commitment? I'm hopeful though, because I think that since schools have started, there have always been people that understand, kind of what we all got into this business for. And that is the joy and the thrill of watching someone improve and get better under your leadership and your tutelage. And so that's kind of the hope that I have, and it's the discussion that I'm having with our younger teachers. And then I think the other thing that as a site leader that we're trying to do is to remember to have fun this year. I mean, we do have everybody back on campus. And if we can make that school setting fun and enjoyable for the kids as much as possible, create that loving setting that we want to nurture them in, then I think that that's going to rub off on, the staff members as well. Last Friday, we gathered some of our veteran teachers out on the playground, circled some of the kids up, and we started teaching them the Forest Grove song. And so just something as simple as that, singing in the middle of recess, having adults maybe step out of their comfort zone when they're willing to do so, and do those kinds of things that make the school setting enjoyable and fun are going to be the kinds of things that maybe will help soften the hard edge of the challenges that this job presents at this time. But I tell you what, one of the most challenging parts of this job is we're doing every single thing that we normally do with an added layer of safety procedures and restrictions up on top of it as well. And I think that having those conversations with the new teachers, letting them know that, no, it's not always like this. And yes, those great moments that you're having in class, you can experience over and over again.
Buck, next time you have your team out there singing, I think we need some footage. You might, you might get a spot on the show. You both already talked about, the toll that it's taking on your teams, on your people. I've seen this firsthand in my daughter's school. I mean, mid-year, middle school, they've lost 4 teachers in the middle of the year just because folks, just realize they can't do this and they're thinking about their own mental health. So we know the question of how folks are doing, and it doesn't seem like folks are okay. Buck talked about some strategies. Anything else from a systemic level, Nicole, that we could think about, strategies out there? I know in your HR world that's a big discussion piece on what we can do during these difficult times to really try to meet the needs of our employees.
Well, I really appreciated what Buck had to say about reminding new teachers that it's not always like this. And I think, continuing to strive toward normalcy, and that is, that's what we're all trying to get back to, but reminding educators that the work that they're doing right now is so important. My job has never been more difficult. I think most educators would say the same. But I'll tell you, I've never been more proud to be an educator than during this pandemic, because the role that school employees have played in helping maintain mental health, education, services to students, food delivery, all of that has been remarkable. It's so further beyond what I would have expected to come from schools, that I think that reminder of this work is really important. But I also think we need to be working, that's kind of touchy-feely. On the practical side, we need to be really fostering new teachers and working with people who have any inkling of going into the classroom and giving them experience to see, is this your calling or not? And if so, let's get you into a program. And I know some districts have really great kind of feeder programs from paraprofessional into the teaching program. It's something that I know CSEA has offered scholarships. There's been different scholarships out there through different agencies. That's one of the discussions that we're having in our district and in surrounding areas, is how can we really build teachers from within our organization, because they already know the challenges and they know the rewards. And so let's see if we can get them to a position where they're the teacher and not the assistant.
Hey, Buck, we touched on this earlier in the broadcast, right at the top, about the approval for the COVID-19 vaccine for kids 5 to 11. And this kind of sets the clock really for educators, because once we get full FDA approval, anticipated that July 2022 is when we will have the educators now not able to test, but they must have the vaccine. Do you think this changes some of the discussion, some of the conversation in your community and maybe other school communities as well?
Well, I think that statewide, it's definitely going to change the conversation. I think that, as challenging as the conversations have been up to this point, I think that, passing the governor's mandate is going to be a kind of a critical point in our journey through this COVID pandemic. So as far as what I think is going to happen, I think that, well, you know what? I really don't know. And I know that's not a great answer right now, but I have to be honest. I think locally that we're going to be okay, because it's not going to affect that many of our staff. But in a district where 2/3 of the people are vaccinated and there's 1/3 of the people who aren't, I'm not sure.
I mean, I could see that, because as some of those statistics that we read, you mentioned that your district staff is up there. I mean, it is way up there as far as vaccine rates. We talked about Cupertino, we talked about Carmel, but there are other districts where it's below 80% or below 70%. So something like that definitely could change the conversation. Edgar, you got a couple of questions from our audience.
Yeah, Nicole, I was going to ask you the question that Marie posed about holdouts on COVID testing. And she was curious how other districts are handling this. Obviously, in your capacity, you've had to deal with this. Have you had to resort to putting people on unpaid leave? How have you been managing this situation?
In our particular district, we have not had to put anybody on unpaid leave. We negotiated an agreement with one of our bargaining units about how to deal with people who didn't test. And it was, we would start the discipline process. What we have done is we have told our employees that the testing is a requirement. Some have said, I can't take that particular test, I need a different test. And what we've told our employees is, if you have a physical limitation that prevents you from being able to use the test that the district's using, you can either choose your own test and have results submitted from a different laboratory, or if you have a medical note that you bring to us, we will review those limitations and see what test is appropriate. And if there's a different test that we can get, we will get that test. So there is no medical limitation that we've received that has allowed anyone to not test. In fact, I've had my faith in some of our medical professionals restored, because some staff that thought that they could easily get a note saying this employee cannot test, the doctors said, I'm not going to give you that note. What we did allow employees to do is to use personal leave or vacation leave while they sorted out what approach they wanted to take, while they went to the doctor to ask for the note that they didn't get, or a note describing what their limitations were, so we could find a test that would work for them. We allowed them to use leave to get there. But the agreement that we have with one of our bargaining units is that if they're not testing, we will follow progressive discipline up to dismissal.
I'll ask one more question to both of you as we're talking about, the problem. And I think the problem of practice has been well established around the state, that we're going to have some issues here and likely going to get more difficult. So obviously, from our capacity at ACSA, we're asking ourselves, okay, what are some things that we can maybe do? I know both of you alluded to this, both at the staff level, locally. Asking you to kind of, if you had a wish list, whether it be from the state policy perspective, what are some things that we can do or push for to help, the staffing situation? I'll start with Buck.
Well, I think that one of the things that we can do is to keep the funding stream flowing for more than just 1 or 2 years. I think that the recovery from what we've been through for the past year and a half is going to be looking at something that's going to be more to like 3 to 5 and past that. So as much as we can keep the funding going, so that when we do have the qualified people ready to come to work, that we are able to fund those positions, and then also appropriately pay our folks that are really putting in the time and sacrifice now. That I think that we need to make the profession an attractive one for people to go into, and part of that is going to come down to the paycheck. And so if we can kind of keep the funding stream going and advocate for the funds not only to continue the programs that are in response to COVID, but also kind of that base funding as well, then I think that's going to set the stage for a healthy recovery on the side of the schools.
Nicole, I know you have some thoughts on this issue, so I'll give you a chance to answer.
I sure do. I would like our legislators to keep in mind that every decision that they make, they need to consult with practitioners and discuss the timeline for those decisions. If they continue to make decisions that require us to hire additional staff, and especially additional staff with specific qualifications, they're asking us to do the impossible. And so while we have been getting the job done, we're going to reach a point where we just can't. And I think that some of us are there. and others are very close. So my wish list would be that those decisions be made in consultation with practitioners, and that any decision made keeps in mind all the timelines that school districts have to abide by.
Hey, before we go, Buck, you agreed to join us yesterday afternoon or so. How much promotion did you do for your appearance today?
Absolutely none.
None? Okay. All right.
I might have mentioned it to my wife.
Okay. Because I want to mention this. Tori Martinez in our chat here says Buck was my media and journalism teacher 20 years ago at Pacific Grove High. Great to hear about how things are going in PG. So whatever promotion you did or didn't do, your students are certainly coming out of the woodworks from 20 years ago to be part of this. So I just want to
warms my heart, and I'm so glad that Tori joined us. Tori is fantastic. So Tori, it's great to see you again. And hey, PG is doing its best.
That's what I like to hear. Nicole Glentzer, the Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources at Ukiah Unified School District, Buck Rogaman, Principal at Forest Green Elementary in the Pacific Grove Unified School District. Nicole and Buck, it's been an honor to have you on the show. Thank you so much for what you do and your service to kids, and we look forward to having you on again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Edgar, before we close things out, I want to go to this question. Just give me a moment here, because Angela Shull, who's one of our longtime viewers here, asked this question: are there any looming lawsuits out there opposing the student vaccine mandate? I guess this is something that we're going to really have to monitor. But at least as far as you know, are there any lawsuits right now or ones that are coming?
Yeah, it's a complicated answer. I'll give the short version is that there's definitely going to be some legal challenges. I think we're already seeing some efforts to challenge what districts have done locally. So obviously before the governor's announcement, there was already some efforts to put some of these requirements, vaccine requirements in individual districts. So we've already seen some challenges there. In terms of the governor's announcement, the one thing keep pointing out, to date, there's actually no policies that's been set forward. All the governor has done is announced his intention to set forth a policy when the FDA gives full approval. They're still going to have to go through the regulatory process. They're going to have to solicit public comment. So it's a little premature to sue them at this point because nothing's in place. We do expect that there's going to be some efforts on that end. I think the thing to keep in mind is what we've been saying over the last few weeks. The timing will be interesting because while the governor is proposing to use regulatory authority, we already suspect that there'll be some members of the legislature that are going to come in and announce probably in the next month or so. And we'll try to get them on this show if they do make those announcements, intent to actually codify this requirement, to make it as part of the law, consistent with every other vaccine that is under the health and safety code. So I think this is definitely going to evolve in the weeks and months to come.
I also want to make note, Mark Campbell, great superintendent up in Calaveras. We have 2 staff on unpaid administrative leave for refusal to test, 1 classified, 1 certificated. We have full support from unions. That is consistent with what I heard from the county soup yesterday over in Calaveras, that there's getting a lot of support, but they do have some employees that are in that situation. Edgar, I do have one other question, and I don't know if we have an answer to this. Armando Farias asks, has there been any additional increased compensation for classified and certificated substitutes at school districts? I want to think that is a district by district situation, correct?
Yeah, and we've seen LA districts around the state take this effort with some of the funding that they got, whether it be from the federal government, from the state government, that had been generally flexible. Some of them have tried to utilize this by upping the ante, if you will, on trying to recruit staff. Now, that presents its challenges on its own, because then we have neighboring districts sometimes having to compete for a smaller universe of folks. But yes, we have seen folks utilize the funding that they've received to increase compensation.
And we had Tiffany Morse, who's the superintendent from Ojai Unified, on the show some time ago, and she was talking about, yes, they raised the substitute rate, but the district right next door raised it even more. And of course, that brings up questions about, can you carry that over year? Can you stay with that increased sub pay that's much higher than the district that's next to you? So certainly another thing. Oak Grove School District just chimed in here, just raised their teacher sub rates from $150 a day last year to $225.
Pretty significant.
So definitely some things to think about. Folks, coming up next week, ACSA Leadership Summit, in person and virtual, starting next Thursday. Here's a preview. Leadership Summit next Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Completely forgot about Saturday. You can register for that, ACSA.org. Right there on the homepage, click the big picture there, and you can register for that. That is an in-person event and also a virtual event. Now, the virtual event will have exclusively next week's edition of the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. We will not be on as we normally are on Wednesday. But if you are signed up for the virtual event or want to sign up for the virtual event, we've got the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break coming Thursday afternoon. Going to be a good one. We're bringing all of Edgar's staff. We'll let them comment on the intro to our show. Something tells me they are going to give us a harder time than you and I are giving each other.
I think we just set them up for that. Yes, I agree.
All right, folks. Thanks so much for being with us today here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. We will see you again Wednesdays, 1 o'clock right here, ACSA Facebook and ACSA YouTube. Have a great rest of the day and great rest of the week.